It's so cold you can actually see the steam rising off my coffee in Florida. If you live here in this area in Tampa Bay, you know that's crazy. Was 2023 good for anybody out there? Did anybody have a good year? Anyone? Anyone? Mr. Bezos, sit down. Yeah, we know. We know, Jeff. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Hope you had a nice holiday, a nice Christmas, whatever you celebrate. You had that coffee. If you're short on time this year and didn't get to watch a lot of my reviews, this is a great video to check out. And this is my favorite books that I read in 2023. Links for all the full reviews of the books mentioned in this video are below in the description box. Let's get right into it. First, the omitted classics or the obvious choices. The first would be The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. Incredible novel about a man, a woman, and their friends in Roaring Twenties Europe post-World War I, in France, and then eventually in Spain. The Lost Generation, partying hard. It's pure Hemingway. All the tropes are there: bullfighting, masculine, competition, fighting for women, heavy drinking. The conflict comes from the fact that the war has left Jake Barnes, our Hemingwayan protagonist and kind of his alter ego, unable to have sex. It's not explicitly explained. In fact, the first time I read it when I was young, I completely missed that part, and so I didn't get the book at all. But this time I absolutely got it. And it's a subtle, tragic, brilliantly written masterpiece. And in all honesty, it was the best book that I read this year. If you were suspicious that it's overrated, don't be. It's not. It's a classic for a reason. Great travel novel, too, if you like that kind of stuff. And number 2, Dune by Frank Herbert. Science fiction for those who don't read science fiction, as the author Frank Herbert describes his writing. And I would typically be part of that group. A little thin on the plot, but beautiful in its atmospheric world building and sensorial description. And, this desert planet with all of the things that people need to do to inhabit it. And it's really quite something. It really does transport you if you can get into it. Yeah, really gorgeous as a literary experience, as a kind of like immersing yourself into a completely different world. I'm not so into the fact that it continued, as one book for me was plenty, but they're there if you want, and from what I hear, it gets very, very strange. So, yeah. But I recommend the first one, absolutely. It's a classic. Highly recommend it. So on to the runner-ups. But real quick, if you thought this last year was rough, you're correct. By just about every metric I can think of, economic, social, spiritual even, this last year was absolutely god-awful. For many of us. Not for everybody, of course. If it was good for you, I'm thrilled. That's awesome. However, for a lot of us, it was really difficult. There's probably been a catastrophic toll on people's mental health just in general because of the obvious events in quick succession. It's a really, really difficult time for a lot of people, and not just in the United States, of course, all over the world, more than I've ever seen in my lifetime. For this reason, aside from taking care of Maslow's, food, job, shelter, etc., we need tools for taking care of ourselves mentally. Some methods I prefer are diet and nutrition combined with lifting weights, as well as limiting or cutting out alcohol entirely. Not a bad idea at all. But another great method is therapy, which is why I'd like to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and accessible, which is helpful because finding a therapist can be potentially very difficult depending on the slim options in your area, especially if you're in an area that is considerably rural, in which case I'm very jealous, and good for you. But yeah, could be a little tough to find a therapist in person, and especially one that you connect with, But this is why BetterHelp is helpful, because you can go anywhere in the world, and as long as you have an internet connection, you have access to your therapist. And they make finding a therapist easy because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out some questions online, BetterHelp can match you with a therapist in as little as just a few days. And it's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link below in the description. It's betterhelp.com/BTF. Clicking on that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. So you can connect with a therapist and see if that helps you. And I sincerely hope it does. And because finding a therapist is a little bit like dating, if you don't initially fit with your therapist, which is a common thing in therapy, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without having to worry about insurance or who's in your network or anything like that. So if you're struggling right now, and let's be honest, who isn't? Please consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Go ahead and click on the link below in the description or go to betterhelp.com/BTF. And thank you very much again to BetterHelp for supporting this show. All right, for the runner-ups of 2023. Starting with the first, Threshold by Rob Doyle. This was a great novel by an Irish author around my age, kind of a semi-fictional memoir, all about his experience with life, drugs, sex, techno in Berlin, art, and literature. Highly recommended for any young man entering the world of early middle age. Made me feel like we're all aging both too fast and too slow. I don't know what that means. It's just what popped into my head. I gotta think about it. Next up, Death in Venice by Thomas Mann. This was a Patron-Only review. It's my first Thomas Mann, actually. I'd like to read The Magic Mountain soon, but it's quite an undertaking. This is a short, surreal novella about a famous German author and widower who becomes obsessed with the beauty of a young Polish boy when he spots him in a hotel in Venice, Italy. While the Visconti film adaptation with Dirk Bogarde, good in some ways, not so much in others, played the narrative as a pretty straightforward story about a pedophile, the book operates on a deeper level. It's a descent into obsessive madness, like a Freudian exploration of sexual repression, and the nature of time, aging, youth, beauty, and death. It's a beautifully written book, obviously very dark, and ultimately very sad. A very influential author, unsurprisingly a huge influence on Yukio Mishima, who basically wouldn't have had a career without it, it seems. I'm pretty sure Thomas Mann was his favorite author. I thought it was an excellent book. Next up, The Wisdom of Life by Arthur Schopenhauer. This was a fine treatise on happiness, like How to Be Happy, by one of the most pessimistic philosophers in history. Definitely made me want to read The World as Will and Representation. I highly recommend it. Next up, The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. Recently reviewed this one. A really enjoyable experimental autobiography and blend of fact and fiction by the author of American Psycho and Less Than Zero. Pretty long, but very readable. Portrays an incredible world, which is early 80s Los Angeles, a culture like there never was, and genuinely creepy, as it deals with cults and a serial killer tracking high school students. Totally demented and highly enjoyable stuff. And just gives you a list of so much great 80s music from the era that, I mean, you know, there's a Spotify playlist, you can just type it in, it's amazing. If you like early 80s Los Angeles culture, and are kind of interested in the dark underbelly of that city, which is very, very distinct, then I highly recommend it. Next up, The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. A collection of classic fairy tales retold through the dark, feminine-centric lens of an eccentric British author who had an affinity for Freud and Sade. I gotta read Freud this year. He keeps coming up. I read this collection years ago when I was in my late teens or early 20s, something like that. I loved it. I thought it was excellent. Angela Carter was one of a kind, totally pioneering for this kind of literature, transforming fairy tales from the Brothers Grimm and Charles Perrault into darkly erotic Gothic literature. Outstandingly well written, often with some terrific British humor and wit. The Company of Wolves is one of my favorite short stories, and it was a great film. There was a great film adaptation as well by Neil Jordan, who did Interview with the Vampire. Worth checking out. And finally, for the runner-ups, A Sport and a Pastime by James Salter. Oh man, great book. This is a beautiful novel about a guy named Dean, an Ivy League dropout who falls in love with a girl in France. And their relationship is imagined by Dean's friend, and that's what the book is composed of. His imaginative version of their highly erotic relationship, down to the most intimate details. I think it sounds a little pervier than it is. While very explicit, it's masterfully written, with such a beautiful, intimate tone that, I mean, I don't think I have ever read a novel that better captures a sexual relationship. It's really a beautiful book. As Salter has said, the novel is kind of an ideal, right? It's worth rereading. It's just to study how Salter constructs sentences. I was really, really impressed. So, yeah. All right, so my favorite books that I read, my 5 favorite books that I read in 2023. Let's go. It's pretty obvious there was a real Southern theme to the books I read this year. That wasn't intentional. I don't know. We had a wonderful trip to Savannah, Georgia for the first time, so I don't know, maybe that's how I got in the mood. Starting off with number 5, the subtle Southern existentialist novel, The Moviegoer, by Walker Percy. It takes place in the 60s. It's a story of Binks Balling, who's a veteran and a young stockbroker in New Orleans, who tools around there and the surrounding area in his nice car with girls, and watches films in theaters as a hobby, ever embarking on what he comes to refer to as the search, which is a state of being, a kind of a modus operandi where Binks is in search of the truth in life. Meanwhile, his aunt is kind of trying to push him to grow up and make something of himself. And he's in love with her daughter, his cousin, who has some serious mental health issues, like a bipolar disorder, I think. It's vague, certainly, but then this is territory that is difficult to put into words, which is why it's worth writing about. It is a kind of quiet, sad meditation on, finding the truth of life and trying to discover authenticity in oneself and others. There are some connections I found or heard about with Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus, which I reviewed for patrons in 2022. And I recommend that you read both at the same time to kind of compare and contrast Camus' absurd, his notion of the absurd, and Walker Percy's search, right? Percy was very inspired, apparently, by Kierkegaard, but I haven't read them yet, so I'll have to make that connection later. It's a meditative, strange, quiet, beautiful novel. Really, it's a book that has to be experienced. It's very difficult to describe. Number 4, The Trouble with Being Born by E.M. Chiron. An old favorite from one of my favorite philosophers. Oh boy. This book is not a novel, but rather a collection of pithy, pessimistic, antinatalistic aphorisms by the Romanian-born French philosopher Émile Chiron, one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, but one who is absolutely not for everyone. Within the work of Chiron, you will find a man trying to be as viciously honest as possible, trying to get to the heart of the darkest subjects imaginable, with as few words as possible, it seems. That is, you'll find a guy who is unafraid of confronting and revealing the truth. Which is not to say that the truth is necessarily so dark, but it just often is, which is why nobody wants to talk about it. Not Chiron. He lives for that shit. He's the kind of guy who perhaps feels a little bit better after confronting the worst possible. While certainly not a character to emulate, Chiron nevertheless does possess a terrific, brilliant wit and dry humor. Certainly for fans of Michel Houellebecq or Thomas Bernard. If you're unsure whether or not it'll be your thing, then read a couple of pages. You'll know very quickly. But he's a gem for me. I mean, he is absolutely, if I'm ever feeling really exhausted with the kind of false positivity that is pervasive on YouTube or, the internet or wherever. And I really just want somebody to kind of like knock me down and lay it out flat so I can get a grip and get a hold of myself or the world around me, then, I mean, he's your man. If you can take it. Number 3, Suddenly Last Summer by Tennessee Williams. This is actually a play, the first I've read from the Southern American author Tennessee Williams, who wrote other well-known plays such as The Glass Menagerie and A Streetcar Named Desire. It's a surreal Southern Gothic drama about a wealthy, waspy woman named Violet Venable, kind of a Norma Desmond-esque matriarch, whose closeted son Sebastian, who she was close with, like way too close with, was killed in some kind of horrific manner, which we don't discover until the end, while vacationing in Spain with his cousin Catherine. Catherine, since returning from the trip and telling her how Sebastian died, has been locked up in an insane asylum by Aunt Violet, and the play revolves around the two of them and Catherine's doctor. See, Aunt Vi, after hearing what Catherine had to say about Sebastian's death, is trying to get this doctor, who's a character in the book, to perform a lobotomy on her, which you could actually do back in the day with medical patients. You could actually have the family could actually do that in America. It was a big problem. Everything got changed. I'm not sure if we're in a better place, but it was definitely not good then either. The family members could enforce medical procedures upon somebody, like, kind of try, especially if you're like homosexual or whatever, they could shock the gay out of you. I wish I was joking. Aunt Vi is trying to get the doctor to perform a lobotomy on Catherine, to shut her up, because what she says happened suddenly last summer, according to Catherine, is just too outrageous. It's insane. The question you're asking the entire time is, of course, what happened to Sebastian? Because whatever it was bad. And it was outrageously bad. It's like one of the craziest endings I've ever heard. It starts to move into a whole nother level of gothic fiction at that point. It's very, very odd, but I loved it. A strange, atmospheric, beautiful Southern Gothic drama with some really over-the-top stuff. I mean, it's really quite bizarre and grotesque. But Tennessee Williams is a complete weirdo, and I love him. The film adaptation with Katharine Hepburn, Liz Taylor, and Montgomery Clift is also definitely worth checking out. It's a good one. Number 2, A Childhood, The Biography of a Place by Harry Crews. This was actually my last review. One of the most emotionally powerful reading experiences of my life. Harry Crews was an American Southern Gothic writer who wrote a distinct, masculine kind of violent but often darkly humorous fiction that came to be nicknamed as grit lit. I've read some of his fiction, but it's his autobiography that really struck me as the work of a truly great author. A Childhood is this autobiography, all about his astoundingly difficult upbringing in the rural, Depression-era farming country of Bacon County, Georgia. And it's a world that doesn't exist anymore. It was there and now it's gone. A place that I would recognize no more as an American than, living in the mountains of Patagonia. I mean, it's just so different, so intensely difficult. The book recounts the events that shaped him, and while at first glance it appears to be filled with pain and sorrow and suffering, the book is actually a surreal, beautiful demonstration of just how incredible life can be, and often is. How stranger than fiction it can become, right? And leaves the reader, us the reader, not with a feeling of hopelessness or despair, but rather of profound awe, not just at how much a person can live through, although there is that feeling as well, but rather awe at what a person can become or achieve in spite of such adversity, or perhaps because of it. Harry Crews is a demonstration that some authors are so connected to a certain place and time, it permeates all their work. The person and the place, their history in this place and this time are inseparable. There's a few people like that. Faulkner was another one. Southern authors, yeah. And number one, these last three have been basically Southern Gothic books, and this is the ultimate. This is the pure stuff. This is the uncut Southern Gothic novel. Number one for 2023, Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. This book is the real deal. I read Wise Blood years ago when I was probably 21 or 22. I didn't understand it at all. I think I picked up a recommendation from Nick Cave or Roland S. Howard or something like that. But I'm thrilled to say that this time it was a complete opposite. I read it this time and I was just like, oh my God, I was just floored. I got it. All of it. And it hit harder than any other book this year. I am telling you, if you read one Southern Gothic novel in your entire life, you've got to read Wise Blood by the Georgian author Flannery O'Connor. It's a story of Hazel Motes, a young man returning from the war, hell-bent, pun intended, on starting his Church of Christ without Christ. He is a vehement atheist trying to eradicate not only himself, but everybody around him of Jesus. Trying to get rid of Jesus, trying to get Jesus out of everything. God does not exist, Jesus does not exist, there is nothing, friends, and you should come and be at my Church of Christ without Christ. And he starts preaching. He is a young anti-preacher with this big wide brim hat, and he is preaching the gospel of no God, and discovering in the process of trying to rid himself and the world of Jesus, the unfathomable, ineradicable religious nature of sacrificial worship that haunts mankind to its bones. And when forcefully ignored, forcefully suppressed, can potentially manifest itself in perverse or grotesque ways, as they do in the book. It starts to get really, really bizarre. And it's amazing. Bleak in a way that only O'Connor could pull off without the whole thing collapsing into comedy. And serious to the point where you're floored by her insight and intelligence. She was a Southern Catholic. She was a Catholic in Georgia, like a serious Catholic, and at a time when they were not at all popular, So she was an outsider. She also died very young from lupus. Died in a horrible way. Probably a virgin as well. Flannery O'Connor had a tough life, right? But she possessed an intelligence and insight that was just staggering, especially for her age. Flannery O'Connor was one of a kind. It's like as Harry Crews, the author of the last book I mentioned, he was like, people like look at her, it's like, oh, here's this cute little woman who raises her peacocks and stuff, and then it's like, oh, well, she's an author, and so they read her book, and that's how they still market her. They market her with like her cute little glasses and her peacocks, and oh, she's so eccentric, and like, oh, she's won these awards and stuff, and then you open these books and you're gonna struggle to find anything darker. There's no male Southern Gothic author who's written anything near as dark as Flannery O'Connor. Truly profoundly dark as Flannery O'Connor. McCarthy comes close, but I'm gonna vote on her. I mean, she really, because hers are, it's the whole thing, right? I mean, it's right down to the core of what it means to be a human being. And she got it. McCarthy gets pretty close in like Blood Meridian, and Faulkner's definitely got some great stuff in Absalom. But for me, my money is on Flannery O'Connor anytime, any day. That is some of the most intense writing I have ever read. And bravo is all I can say. But if any of it is due to her life experience and not just her genetic fortune, probably a mixture of the two. Paid for it dearly and passed away far too young and far too painfully. What a sacrifice. I mean, like, if you had to live her life to be able to write that good, no way. No way, man. It's not a fair trade-off. But for as tough as her life was, I'm happy she was able to produce such work, because it's going to last for centuries, I'd imagine. It's so good. Also, A Good Man is Hard to Find. You ought to check that short story out as well. Both of these books are the best of the best in that genre, right? Not only in Southern Gothic literature, but I think in American literature in general, right? Really, really. The apex of Southern Gothic literature, rivaled only by the best of Faulkner and maybe McCarthy. She is the best in that category, but also one of the greatest American writers who's ever lived ever. In the top 10 books written by American authors in history, Wise Blood is definitely on there for me. It's so good, but yeah, really dark. Well, there you have it. My favorite books I read in 2023. All of the links below are paid Amazon links, and if you buy something through them, anything, then the show gets a kickback, and I sincerely appreciate it. So, thank you very much. All right. I think that's all I've got. Man. Coffee time. For those of you who are new, thank you very much for stopping by and watching the show. I take all the names of the patrons on Patreon who have donated $5 or more per video. I place their names in this mason jar, and for every review I do, I pull out a name, and whoever's name I pull out is sent a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee roasted by yours truly. And the coffee is delicious. If you would like to get in on that and help support the show, you can click on the link below or go to patreon.com/booksofbevanfood and donate $5 or more per video. Thank you very much. You'll also get access to all the cool stuff listed below, such as the Patron-Only Reviews and the Discord channel. Also, international shipping is included. Cool. All right. Thank you very much, all my patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Raul S. Thank you very much, Raul. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive whichever one of the books I've mentioned in this video you like, plus a bag of coffee roasted by yours truly. And I hope you love both. Cheers, and Happy New Year. May the light from the burning corpse of 2023 on the pyre illuminate all the beautiful things coming for you in 2024. And let's forget it forever, shall we? Cheers. Always remember, bring a book wherever you go. All right. Thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night. Talk to you soon. Ciao.